You're listening to Strange by Nature, your guide to the strange, weird, unbelievable, and improbable wonders of the natural world.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I am Kirk Mona, and I am joined today by Rachel Ginza and Victoria Thompson. We are all professional naturalists who together have scoured the world for weird and wonderful wonders just to please your mammalian brain's desire for novelty. Isn't that nice? Let's do this.
All right, everyone. I am getting us started this week, and I am so excited. Okay. So, I already mentioned this to Kirk, Victoria. This is a two-parter. This is the first time where you will know what I am talking about for next week.
Okay.
So a little bit different. And I just, it was such a big topic, I decided to split it into two. It's all I decided to do. So I decided to tackle a question that I get asked all the time, especially in the season that we're at right now or during the winter. It happens all the time, and it's at least hilariously to me. This fact was told by Olaf in Frozen 2.
Okay.
So what I am talking about today is turtles breathing out of their butts.
Okay.
Great.
This is going to take you 2 episodes.
Wow, 2 episodes of turtles breathing out of their butts.
Yes.
Buckle up, everybody.
So scientifically speaking, I'll be talking about cloacal respiration. And next week, I'll be talking about anaerobic respiration. So these are both mechanisms that turtles use in the wintertime. Because the question I get asked all the time, I'm sure both of you do too, what do turtles do in the winter?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of misinformation
There's so many
out
things
there.
that there is.
I think for our listeners who don't live in Minnesota, we should clarify that turtles have to breathe air and lakes here freeze in the winter. So
yes.
Yeah.
I was
Sometimes there
getting-
are 2 feet or more of ice on
Yes.
those lakes, which makes it real hard to get to the air.
Exactly. So a lot of turtles, it really truly depends. For freshwater turtles is what we're going to be focusing on, is freshwater turtles. So many turtles during the frozen icier months, they do a lot of various things to survive. Like a lot of people that I hear, turtles they hibernate over winter. That's just what they do. They burrow down in the mud or whatever, and they stay there, and then they come out in the springtime.
There's a couple things wrong with that.
There's a few things wrong with that. Because what exactly they do depends on the location of the turtle, if their pond or lake that they're on actually completely freezes over, what the temperature is of the winter, what species of turtle they are, the location. All of these things depend, it can vary, and because they vary, the behavior of the turtle is different.
Right.
So, for simplicity's sake, we're just going to focus on the ones that stay underneath the ice that you both were talking about, that happens in lakes and ponds over our colder months during the cold season, which we like to call winter here in Minnesota. So
Correct.
it's several months. So for turtles, that's still a very long time to be going without air. Do either of you know how long a turtle, a freshwater turtle, can hold their breath?
I used to work at a certain unnamed, very large aquarium that has a tunnel through it.
Mm-hmm.
I say unnamed partially because the name has changed many times. And we had in our freshwater lake habitat a turtle that would go down to the bottom and then come back up. And I know that we would see it underwater for 40 minutes at a time. But I don't know that that's a data point of 1.
Yeah, I don't have that factoid at the to the tips of my fingers at hand.
Right.
Whatever the phrase is.
All of those, yes. So your data point is actually pretty good, Kirk. On average, freshwater turtles can hold their breath anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes. 45 minutes
Oh,
generally being about the maximum for freshwater turtles. I clarify because saltwater turtles or sea turtles, they can hold their breath for up to an hour.
Wow.
So they go a little bit
Is that
longer.
because, do you know, is that because generally they're larger?
Part of it
Or
is
they more
because
like
they're
dissolved
larger.
oxygen in their blood, or?
Yeah, part of it is because they're larger and they have a little more lung capacity for that. But the other reason for that, but they still don't generally stay underneath the water for an hour. They'll go and surface every like 4 to 5 minutes because they can. Because I mean,
they
it's
can,
open
yeah.
air. Now in the wintertime, freshwater turtles, even though they can hold their breath up to 45 minutes, when there's ice covering or the air is below freezing, ectotherms or cold-blooded creatures cannot actually allow themselves their body temperatures to get at below freezing temperatures.
They will
That would be
Because
bad.
they
an
would,
ice
by
cube.
definition, freeze.
They
Yes.
would freeze and they
Yeah.
would, like Victoria just said, become an ice cube and they would die. Pretty much an ectotherm would be whatever the air temperature or the surrounding temperature, that's what their body temperature is. So if they go below freezing, then their cells actually start freezing and that would be bad. So they can't go above the ice or anything during wintertime because they would freeze. So
It's below freezing.
it's
right?
below freezing. So there are some ways for that they are able to stay below the ice where the water stays a more consistent temperature and thus their body temperature is a more consistent temp all winter. But they still need to be able to breathe, and that's several months of not being able to go up. So what they do is they use cloacal respiration.
Yep.
Which means that they are able in thin blood areas of their body that have a lot of blood vessels, like say their armpits, around their mouths, and their cloaca or their butt. They can run water, have water pass by those areas, and it quite literally very similar to osmosis. They can take the dissolved oxygen out of the water as it passes by that thin barrier and into their blood vessel and be able to respirate that way to be able to continue to metabolize and have some energy through the winter.
In some ways, it's similar to what happens in the lungs, actually, because the oxygen goes into the lungs, and then there's a very, very thin layer of tissue between the sacs of the lungs, the alveoli, and then the blood vessels where oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged. So It's kind of like the same thing happens, but less efficiently through the butt.
Through their skin and their butt.
Is it similar to how like essentially gills work as well then?
Yes. I would say yes, just because that is generally the basic idea behind gills, is taking dissolved oxygen out of the water. It's just, like Victoria said, way less efficient.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what a cloaca is, listeners, it's the all-purpose hole. Poop, pee.
That's a good way to put it.
Poop, pee, mating, eggs.
Yes. What dinosaurs have,
Yeah.
it's what chickens have, all the birds and
most birds.
Amphibians, reptiles.
Yeah.
I feel like we've talked about it. I definitely talked about it at least once.
It's come up.
Yeah.
We talk about cloaca from time to time.
We do. The other thing to keep in mind is even though they're going through and they're respirating, and they are using that cloacal respiration, they don't need as much dissolved oxygen as they would during the summer months, because as their body temperature gets lower, their metabolism also gets slower. They have lower energy needs, so they have lower oxygen needs. So that allows them to go longer without being able or without needing a lot of oxygen. Turtles tend to not move a ton in winter.
One of the
And so that
advantages of
helps.
being cold-blooded.
Yes. Many kinds of reptiles, like sea snakes, and turtles, and amphibians actually also do cloacal respiration, which I thought was really fascinating. So it's not just turtles that do this type of respiration. However, if all of the dissolved oxygen gets depleted in that pond or lake because there's no open air exchange of more oxygen coming into the pond because there's an ice barrier,
Right.
they swap to anaerobic respiration, which I will discuss next week.
Intriguing.
Oh.
Bum, bum, bum.
Dun, dun, dun.
We're going to take a bit of a break, and when we return, it'll be Victoria.
Happy 2022, everybody. You know, 2021 was a tough year for all of us. We heard from a lot of you that the podcast really helped get you through the year. We know we had a record-setting December with over 1,000 downloads just in the month of December alone. So thank you so much for that. We really appreciate you as our audience, and we love that our family here keeps on growing. Also, a big thank you to those of you who in the last year joined the Society of Strange over at Patreon. That's the group of people who give money to help support the show and keep it going. You also get some fun bonus content almost every week over there at Patreon. So if you haven't yet checked us out, head on over to patreon.com/strangebynature to learn more about the society and how you can keep the show going into 2022 and beyond. So thank you again for a great year. We're looking forward to another one, and we'll get back to the show.
All right, folks. An unknown killer stalks the Pacific Northwest.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Bigfoot.
Oh.
Not Bigfoot.
I have an idea where this is going.
Okay.
But go on.
Okay.
We'll see if you're right.
I'm intrigued.
Oh my god.
Much like the culprit in an Agatha Christie novel, the murderer remained undetected by hiding in plain sight, appearing to be unassuming and harmless, but concealing their deadly secret from investigators until now.
Oh my.
I am talking about Triantha occidentalis, which is the western false asphodel, a wildflower.
Okay. You
Definitely not the story I was
Okay.
thinking of.
Yep.
I want to
Also,
know what you were
That's
thinking of.
probably
Tell
for
us
the
later.
best. I don't know if you did. Yeah. Oh boy.
You rattled that off just so quickly and so like beautifully, but also
Can you give it to us
what?
again there?
What the plant is, or my whole spiel?
Yeah,
Yes.
please.
Okay.
Both.
No, gosh, not the whole thing.
Triantha occidentalis, the western false asphodel.
Okay.
All right.
It's a wildflower.
Tell us more about it.
Okay. So it's been known to science since the 19th century, and it's found often not far from urban centers, from central California to Alaska. But
Okay.
a group of researchers at the University of British Columbia have now shown it to be a carnivorous plant.
What?
Oh!
Yes, nobody knew.
I'm a little concerned because you said occitalis?
Occidentalis means western.
Occidentalis. Oh, okay. Well, then
Yeah,
I feel a little
Occident,
bit
like
better.
Occidental, Oriental.
Okay.
Yep.
I got concerned because I have an occitalis plant in my room, and I'm just staring it
And-
down.
Were you afraid that it was going to eat you at night?
No, not in the slightest.
Feed me, Rachel.
She totally is.
All
I
right.
don't know
Gonna
what they
lock
do
her
when I
bedroom door
sleep.
tonight.
Getting this episode back on track.
Good luck.
Usually when people think about carnivorous plants, they think of something fairly dramatic, like the Venus flytrap being the best known, of course. It's extra exciting because it, closes suddenly, trapping the little insect in the cage. But also well known are pitcher plants, where insects fall into a little cup of liquid and are digested. Also sundews, which can wrap their sticky tentacles around their prey. So by contrast, Triantha occidentalis is a modest little plant. There are some, so it's, I couldn't find out exactly how tall it is, but there are some blade-like leaves at the base of the plant, a little bit like a lily, daylily, and then a single long stem that supports a cluster of small white flowers. And people had long noted that the stem had small sticky hairs on it in which small insects sometimes became trapped, but they were considered to be purely a defensive adaptation.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right.
It did make some people curious, though, especially combined with the fact that the plants live in boggy areas.
That should also be a clue.
Yes. So about 5 years ago, some curious scientists did a little genetic analysis and found that this plant was missing a specific gene that, it's complicated, but it kind of tweaks how photosynthesis is done. And typically this gene is missing in carnivorous plants. So the fact that this one was missing it was suggestive.
That's
very,
so
very
cool.
suggestive.
Yes.
I didn't know you were going to do such a suggestive episode.
Well, it
They're
is.
they're like Scooby-Dooing their way to finding this little carnivorous plant that's always been there.
Yeah. So
kids.
Our chief investigator for this study was Chanchi Lin at the University of British Columbia, and they worked with colleagues to figure out whether or not Triantha was really carnivorous or not. So they were able to tag fruit flies with nitrogen-15, which is a slightly heavier isotope of nitrogen. They fed them a diet high in nitrogen-15, so the fruit flies became supercharged with N15.
I wonder what supercharged fruit flies would look like with nitrogen.
Just a tiny bit heavier, I guess.
Okay. They are more appealing.
That is fair.
Very, very small amount. So they let the fruit flies get trapped by the plant.
Yep.
Okay.
Power
let them
through
get
there.
Trapped through by the plant.
Yeah.
These slightly heavier fruit flies.
And they were able to show that this heavier isotope was taken up by the plant's tissues.
Very cool.
Okay.
Yeah, and they also found an enzyme on the stem that is typically used by carnivorous plants to help digest their prey.
There it is.
So, slam dunk. So it's pretty cool. What is really weird about this plant, though, is that the insect trapping stem is very close to the flowers. So normally carnivorous plants try to keep their traps far away from their flowers. Why?
Right.
Pollinators.
Because you don't want to trap the pollinators.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'd be not good if your pollinators get eaten by you.
It would be anti the point.
Just so. But the researchers think that Triantha may avoid this problem by having such small, relatively weak, sticky trapping hairs. So they're strong enough to catch very small insects like fruit flies, small beetles.
Heavy fruit flies, yeah.
Yeah, heavy fruit flies.
They're like, oh, I'm so full of nitrogen. I'll just rest on this sticky stem.
Oh. It's
But-
it's us after Thanksgiving dinner, all the turkey.
Yes.
Right.
But the bigger insects don't
Right.
get trapped.
Like the bees, the
Yeah.
butterflies, the pollinators don't get stuck,
Okay.
Nice.
they think. So another amazing thing is that this species is part of a whole group of plants that was not at all previously known to be carnivorous. So it's an entirely new lineage. So that's
Really?
pretty cool. Yeah. And it can also,
Awesome.
yeah, it can also kind of potentially show how carnivorous, I was going to say behavior. I don't know if you can say behavior about a plant. How carnivory can evolve independently in different plant families.
I knew you were going to pull out the word carnivory.
I
Great
didn't,
word.
but I love it.
I saw it coming a mile away.
But you can also start to see how carnivorous traps might have evolved just from defensive hairs in various plants.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it's very cool discovery all around.
Awesome.
When did they make that discovery?
Well, the paper was just published this year.
Oh, so this is all so recent. We're on the cutting edge. This is
Yes.
amazing.
Yes. I try to
love
keep
new
up on the science news.
It's so good. That's honestly so exciting.
Yeah, and I was reading somewhere else in my research that they're like since the year 2000, they just keep discovering new carnivorous plants in various areas and different parts of the plant kingdom. So they keep turning up in unexpected places. Maybe you'll find one.
We should start expecting it, I guess.
Yeah.
You never do expect those carnivorous plants.
No one expects plant carnivory. It's chief weapon of surprise.
See, that should be the episode title.
Perhaps.
Oh man.
All right.
Thank you.
Yep, that's what I have on carnivorous plants this time. And when we come back from the break, it's going to be Kirk.
I'll start off my my story this week with a quote from Aristotle. Going way back.
How highbrow of you.
Yeah,
Why would you know?
Aristotle. This was from his... Uh-oh, we've lost Rachel to the giggles. Who knew it was so easy? This is from his treatise on earth sciences. So to set this up, he's talking about water and about the concepts of freezing. And he says, the fact that water has previously been warmed contributes to its freezing quickly, for so it cools sooner. Hence, many people, when they want to cool hot water quickly, begin by putting it in the sun. So the inhabitants of Pontus, when they encamp on the ice to fish, then in parentheses, they cut a hole in the ice and then fish. For those people who don't understand ice fishing, they pour warm water around their reeds that it may freeze the quicker, for they use the ice like lead to fix the reeds. Now, I'm not talking about ice fishing this week.
Okay.
I'm talking about freezing, and which coincidentally is what you do when you ice fish. But
I think Aristotle's full of it.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much.
Well, you might think that, but similarly, the great thinker Francis Bacon said, quote, "We should also deal with the preparation of substances to receive cold. For example, slightly warm water will freeze more easily than water which is altogether cold, and so on." And then also in his essay on meteorology, René Descartes says, "We can also see by experiment that water which has been kept hot for a long time freezes faster than any other sort, because those of its parts which can least cease to bend evaporate while it is being heated." He had some weird ideas about how molecules and things work in there, but
a little bit.
there is this persistent idea in many cultures around the world throughout history that hot water freezes faster than cold water.
Okay.
Which is strange.
Don't like that.
Right?
I don't
But that's
like
what makes
it.
it strange, right? And that's what's made it this intriguing thought. Like, could this be true that hot water freezes faster than cold water? And why would that be? This does have a name. In modern times, we call it the Mpemba Effect. And it was named after a Tanzanian schoolboy whose last name was Mpemba. This was back in the 1960s. And where this kind of started, it was kind of a fun story, is I believe he was in secondary school. And for a class, like a cooking type class, they decided to make ice cream. And all the kids had to mix up all their, the cream and the sugar and all those ingredients and place it into a freezer. And he got a little bit of a late start compared to some other kids. And so when it came time to put them in the freezer, his was still like hot because they had to heat all the, to melt the sugar and things like that, or whatever it was they were doing.
Right.
And so he was also apparently worried about there not being enough freezer space at the school for everybody to put theirs in. So he kind of panicked and put his in the freezer while it was still like hot out of the pan, which is a big no-no.
Okay.
You're supposed to let it cool down to room temperature first. And a lot of people
so that way
are kind of like, dude, that's not gonna take yours forever to freeze compared to everyone else's.
Well, also it raises the temperature of the
Well,
freezer.
yeah, it's not real great for the freezer either,
Yeah.
right? You're making it work really hard.
It's bad.
Well, he went in to check on his, expecting like, oh, mine won't be probably ready, and to his shock, discovered that his had already frozen, while his classmates who'd put theirs in after theirs had cooled down to room temperature, theirs were not yet frozen. And this was quite a surprise to everybody. But reportedly, the students also sold ice cream. And so over time, they started to use this technique of putting it in the freezer hot so they could make their ice cream even faster and sell more because they could make it faster. This was an ongoing
I
thing
want ice cream.
Weird.
they were doing. And by the time Mpemba was in like high school, essentially, one of his teachers brought in a visiting physics professor. And at the end, the professor was, you don't have any questions. And he's like, yes, I have a question. He's like, how come we see this effect that when we put things in to the freezer when they're hot, they will freeze faster than when they're cold? And he had some evidence and whatnot. And instead of sort of laughing him off and being like, no, silly boy, this can't be right, he was like, I can't think of any reason why that would be true. It seems to violate the laws of physics, but we should
Just a little.
we should test that. He was intrigued. This kind of idea kept kind of stuck in his head. He got kind of intrigued by it. A number of years later, when Mpemba was in college, he was still talking with this professor, and they said, let's collaborate on a research project. So they tested this out. They prepared all these samples, and they froze them and figured out how long it took them to freeze, and they published a now kind of famous paper, the two of them together, on the effects that temperature has on freezing. And it's been known now as the Mpemba effect when you see this. So it's a truly amazing story because it seems to violate, like we said, everything we know about physics. There is a problem with this concept of the Mpemba effect. It turns out it is incredibly difficult to actually test. And it doesn't sound like it'd be that hard, right? You just put stuff in and put hot stuff in and cold stuff in and see which one freezes first, right? That seems simple.
Is it in
but
the
it's
same? Wouldn't
not.
they still interact in the same freezer? Like,
But you could test it in separate freezers easily enough.
but
You
then
test a
there's
separate feature. But the problem is that we don't even really have a good definition of what the Mpemba effect is. So sure, there's a general idea that water freezes faster when it's hot. But what exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about the time for the water to reach 0 degrees centigrade? Or is it the time for an ice layer to form across the top? Or is it the time that it takes for the entire container of water to freeze solid? Like, there is no official definition for what the Mpemba effect even is. So when you go to test it, you're like, well, wait a minute. What exactly am I actually even testing? And there's so many variables at play. How hot does the water need to be? How long are you supposed to keep it hot? Is it just you bring it to boiling and boom, we're ready to go? Or is it, what if you boil the water all day or for an hour? Like, or keep it at a certain temperature for a long time? Does that change things about the amount of dissolved gases in the water? Like, there's all kinds of things that can change. Does it just have to be just water, or do ice cream ingredients being added, like cream and sugar, make a difference? Are the two samples in the same type of container? Does the container depth matter? Are there tiny imperfections on the sides of the container that you can't see? There are nucleation sites that makes ice crystals start to grow in one faster than the other. So can you even guarantee that your two containers are identical, even if they look identical? Does the surface area matter? Does the type of cooling matter? Like, are we cooling them down by being in just cold air? Or is the container in contact with a cooling plate or a cold, like icy surface within the freezer that's affecting the actual, like, how much contact area is on there? Is the warm container, when it goes in, melting an icy shelf, which is then creating a greater contact area, so you get more contact cooling? Like, there's so many variables when you get right into it that it becomes very, very difficult to actually test. And I think it's a great example, a great thought experiment to think about, how do we actually test something? Because something can seem so easy and straightforward when you first think about it. Like, oh, we just put 2 containers of water in a freezer, see which one freezes first. But when you're actually trying to test science and look at all those variables, it can get extremely complicated very quickly. And that's what happens when people have tried to test this. There are literally hundreds of different variables that have to be accounted for. And part of
You
the
have to account for those variables, otherwise, like, you're gonna get someone's gonna point at you, another scientist is gonna be like, "What are you doing? You forgot about this. What if this?"
Well, that's how science works.
This
Yeah,
is how science works.
yeah, exactly. Do you consider that's like that scientific question? And when we look at a lot of the experiments that have been done around the Mpemba effect, what we find is that they really did not necessarily carefully control for a lot of these variables. Now, lots of time has been spent trying to recreate the initial experiments that showed this effect to be real, and many people have tried to come up with plausible explanations for why it could be happening, trying to explain some hypotheses behind what would explain those initial experiments. And perhaps they speculate that the hotter water evaporates and radiates away heat faster because it is more likely to evaporate when it's in there. Perhaps the cold water has more dissolved gases, and that is going to affect the rate that it freezes. I also talked about like the hot water melting ice around the contact surface of the freezer, and that somehow conducting more heat away quicker.
Maybe it's more likely because the hotter water has more energy to it and more able and willing to shift to a different state of matter.
Yeah, people have been looking at all kinds of like really tiny effects, and could some of these things kind of add up? And if it can, it tells us new things about water. And to be clear, we are still learning new things about water and ice to this day. It's still something scientists are studying quite a lot because there's a lot of strange things that happen. There are many ideas about what could be causing this, but there was an analysis published in 2016 by Burridge and Linden in Nature magazine's Scientific Reports. So it's a scientific kind of study, and it was called Questioning the Mpemba Effect. Hot water does not cool more quickly than cold. They're pretty adamant right there in the title of their paper.
Yeah.
I thought this paper does a really good job, at least in my mind, of detailing that there are flaws in many of the studies done. And when the data is actually properly analyzed from quality studies, the Mpemba effect sadly seems to disappear and be simply a popular myth. But I'm still open-minded. I mean, people have proposed some really interesting reasons why it may be true. And what we really need is carefully designed and controlled experiments that show a measurable and repeatable effect. And what this study showed is that they could not repeat it, and neither could anyone else once you controlled for variables. And that's the cool thing about science, though. Like, if other studies show up, I'm always ready to change my mind. For now, I'm going to consider this one a persistent, strange by nature myth. The world is truly full of weird, strange effects. I think this one, is probably going to turn out to be observer bias or not carefully designed experiments in the end. But I will say, like all things in science, I'm happy to be proved wrong. Because
it's the best when you get proven
it's my
wrong.
favorite thing to be proved wrong, because you're like, oh my gosh, the world knows more than it knew before, and now I know more than I knew before, and I know that I was wrong before, and I'm always happy to be corrected and change my mind. That's how science works. You have to be ready to take all of your preconceived notions, and when the evidence actually shows something to the contrary of what maybe your dearly held belief is, you go, well, shoot. All right, time to change. So, Mpemba effect, I think it's probably a myth that is a quirk of, how some of the experiments were set up, or some just like bias in terms of how we were observing the results. But it is intriguing, and even if it turns out to be wrong, scientists have spent a lot of time doing some really good thinking about how it could be possible. And those are never worthless exercises to do, to imagine how things would be possible. Because sometimes even when an initial thing ends up being wrong, maybe some of your thinking on something led you to make a different discovery that you never would have done if you had not been researching a hypothesis that turned out to be incorrect.
Yeah. Oh, I love
Cool.
science.
Well,
That's so cool.
thanks, Kirk. What a neat story.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a fun one.
Yeah. Thanks, Kirk.
Well, that's all we have for this week. But you know what? Next week, episode 50.
Episode
Ooh.
50. Mm-hmm.
Spoiler alert: we're not really doing anything particularly special.
Nah.
But we do want you to listen. So we'll see
Yes.
everyone next week.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Thanks everyone for listening to today's show. Be sure to subscribe. New episodes drop every Wednesday, and we love sharing this strange world with all of our listeners. If you would be so kind as to leave us a 5-star review, that would be great. It lets other lovers of the strange discover the show. You can reach out to us on social media by searching for Strange by Nature Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can send us an email as well. Our address is contact@strangebynaturepodcast.com. If you want more information about the show, you can also check out our website, which is strangebynaturepodcast.com. Until next week, get outside, stay curious, and embrace the strange.